Welcome to Expanding Your Faith, a podcast hosted by Bishop Greer Godsey of the Old Catholic Churches International. Expanding Your Faith brings together a panel of well-educated clergy and laity to discuss modern events with a biblical perspective. Our podcast is about to start. Please stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Expanding Your Faith. I'm Bishop Greer, and joining me tonight is Reverend Marc.
Greetings, everyone.
And Bishop Ben.
Blessings to everybody.
And so tonight we're going to talk about overcoming isolation and depression. Had a lot of people lately talk about how difficult the whole isolation thing is, and being alone and not having people to talk to or be around, and how difficult that's been for them. And of course, I myself deal with depression on a daily basis. That's a never-ending battle for me. I think a lot of ministers do. And so, we're going to talk about that this evening and see if we can't help you all a little bit with those topics and issues. So, isolation is one of the biggest issues people are facing nowadays, I think. And it didn't help that we spent, the majority of COVID isolated from each other. And, we did it for so long that at a certain point it kind of became habit. And so a lot of people are still in these self-imposed isolation periods because of, the risk of COVID, the risk of catching something. And then there are those that, of course, are, isolated not by choice. The fact that families abandoned them, friends have abandoned them. They have no church or social organizations with which to participate in. And so that makes that even more difficult if you don't have available outlets to socialize and to be around people and to kind of recharge your social battery, as it were. I think most of us in ministry have the opposite problem typically. Not as much isolation as it is we have too many people calling on us. And we crave a certain amount of isolation. But, yeah. So we want to talk about that first, I think, is the whole isolation. Then we'll get into depression. So,
I even as ministers, I think we can be around people and still be isolated. I don't think geography or location necessarily means isolation. Sometimes there's a form of isolation that I find myself in based on being a minister. There's certain things that you hold to yourself. There's confidentiality that people that you have to hold, and people come to you and they talk about some very deep things that are going on in their lives. You have to sometimes be isolated away from prying, people that want to know things, and you have to pull yourself back. There's sometimes a degree of restraint that you have to have in social settings and social media. And because there's a certain aspect that ministers have to have of, you can't really be completely transparent. Not that you're lying, but you just can't be completely transparent when you're going through situations. Right. And that comes back to something I'm sure we're going to get into, and that is having folks around you that you can be transparent to.
Right.
Whereas some people can just go to social media and air out their laundry. Um, as a leader, as a minister, there's some things that you have to hold.
Right.
And, I myself have dealt with depression. I myself have dealt with attempted self harm. And if you've ever heard some of my testimony, I've shared it very, very sparsely, but some of my testimony that I've given, there was a time that I had intended to really hurt myself years ago. But at that point, I believe the love of God reminded me of all the things that I'm supposed to do. It was a flood of reminders, and I've had to deal with my share of depression, my share of isolating myself. Sometimes that's a thing for me when I'm faced with trying to work out how to handle situations, because I work a full-time job, plus I'm pastoring there at MCC.
Right.
And as everybody knows, pastoring is a full-time job, no matter how they pay you.
Right.
And then you just have to, and then dealing with life. Sometimes you have situations where I pull back just so I can figure out how to handle certain things, and that can be a good thing. It can also be a very detrimental thing if I don't watch it. And there's some safeguards that I have in place when I feel that way. I do, in roundabout ways, alert certain people of what I'm going through. But isolation can definitely lead to depression. It can also lead you to recognizing what matters.
Right.
It can lead you to recognizing who in your life is in it for your welfare versus not. So, isolation that leads to depression is difficult, but I don't think isolation in itself is necessarily a bad thing in certain scenarios. But you have to find yourself living a life that isn't constantly isolated, because then that leads to some rough areas. Because
Right.
whether we like to admit it or not, some people more so than others, we're all designed and created for relationships.
Yes.
We all are. Some people have one or two good friends. Some people have a whole plethora of folks that they consider friends. Those people, not to be offensive, but those type of people exhaust me, because it's like, how do you keep up that energy to have so many connections?
Right. Right.
I myself, can be very introverted at times, but I have learned, being in leadership, how to recharge the battery, because I have to be with people so much. So it can be a good thing, but if you are finding yourself in constant isolation, constant withdrawal, then you're gonna. It may not lead to the best places.
This is very true, and that's where it leads us into those dark moments where we have the issues with concern about self-harm and stuff like that, especially when we don't have a network of people around us to help us and support us through those tough moments in life.
Very much.
And so we have to be we have to understand that we need that support network. Even sometimes when we don't really want it, we need it. Tara says, I find I have to withdraw because most times the energy gets sucked out of me and I become exhausted. And I think that a lot of us do that. A lot of us take the opportunity for moments of self imposed isolation in order to, kind of recharge our batteries, get back to a place of homeostasis, as it were, so that we can help others. We can't help others if we're empty.
That's right.
You can't pour from an empty cup, and so I think it's a very necessary for us to recharge our batteries from time to time.
Well, and to piggyback on that, in the Christian faith, we have a lot of passage of scripture. We have a lot of imagery that talks about how we are to, that God will put in us living water, streams of living, rivers of living water, that we're to be oak trees, that we're to be trees of righteousness.
Right.
All of those things show us a picture of constant reaching, constant growing, reaching deeper, and the water portion, when the Spirit is giving us fresh water. We go to Jesus famously told the woman at the well, if you drink my water, you'll never thirst again.
Right.
And so that depicts the fact that we are to have a filling. There's something supposed to be inside of us that is, one, for our benefit, and two, for the world's benefit. It may be one person, it may be multiple, depending on your life and who
Right.
you're a part of. So it is essential. I 100% agree. It is essential at times to make sure, however works, to get that battery recharged,
Right.
because we can't constantly be giving out and
Yeah.
expect it to be perpetual if we don't ever, with even Christ withdrew at times, and Christ was God's God's son,
Right.
and pulled aside and spent some alone time.
Tara said, but I wonder who clergy go to. Well, I mean, for us, sometimes it's hard because, we have to be able to trust the person that we're going to, that they will hold in confidence anything that we tell them.
Yep.
Because, we don't want them going out and blabbing everything that we say to people.
Yep.
And that makes it difficult. And sometimes it's helpful because we have other clergy who can help us out, who understand that concept. And then in some instances, it's difficult even then because, we feel like we're adding to another colleague's burden.
Sure.
And so it's difficult. I mean, there's things I can't talk to my own wife about, even though she's in ministry with me, because I can't talk to anyone about them,
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have to carry that kind of weight around, that gets very hard sometimes.
Yeah, it does. One thing that I practice, because I know that I have the tendency to land in depressive moments. I have time, I can land in self-isolation. And this hasn't always been the case, but, God has always brought people in my life, such as Bishop, and a few others that I'm able to confide in, and hopefully they and me, if they need to, things that are going on. I'm very much a person who is, I don't know everything. I'm not going to pretend like I know everything. And I've always practiced going to different people and talking through scenarios that they may know more in that particular area than I do,
Right.
and glean their insight. Sometimes they offer a suggestion or a solution that is spot on. Sometimes while they're talking, a solution comes to me along the lines of what they're saying.
Right.
And so I practice that. But I also practice, touching base with certain people, kind of letting them know where I'm at. I do go to a therapist periodically just to help. They hold things confidential. And
Right.
so that's a professional setting. Not everybody has access to that, but fortunately I do. Hopefully us throwing out some of the things that we do that help us will be maybe some ideas or a launching platform for you that are listening. I don't tell everybody everything. There's certain people that can handle certain things that I can tell them, and then there's other people that can't.
Right.
Case in point, when I was a young minister, I shared, was it last week we talked about it, or the week before we talked about ministers, what they go through. When I was a very young minister, I was only 23 when I first started pastoring, actually 22. When I took my first pastorate, and then was pastoring, growing up, and seminary, all lumped into one.
Right.
And one thing that I was faced with, just to give you an example, I didn't know how to run board meetings. Well, one of the people in my church, my father, is if you know anything about it, he is a Robert's Rules of Order specialist.
Yeah.
So my dad has been on so many boards. He's on a pretty prestigious board right now, still this day. And so if I didn't know how to do something, I would have him walk me through how to do it. So I gleaned and listened and grew in that experience. And so surrounding yourself with people that know more than you do, I think should be the goal with a lot of people.
Right.
But there were certain things that I couldn't talk to him about. Obviously, I couldn't talk to him about when I would counsel somebody, or if we had certain situations in the church, I'd go to my bishop, talk to about certain ministry things. And so you have to learn boundaries with folks. Sometimes they're self-imposed by the other person, and sometimes you have to recognize they're not capable of talking about, 1, 3, and 4 on your list, but they can talk to you about 2, 5, and 6 on your list. And that's okay, because not all of us has all the knowledge.
Right.
And so I think if you're prone to isolation, finding 1, 2, or 3 individuals, I wouldn't get more than that, to let them know that, hey, I'm not doing well. And that took a while for me to get there. I wasn't that, because I was God's person of faith and power. I was a minister, so I was immune to everything.
Right.
I just used my faith to get over it.
Yeah.
Well,
how did that work out for you?
Yeah, well, Proverbs tells us iron sharpens iron.
That's right.
So there are people that God strategically places in our lives that are put there to help us.
That's right.
Not everybody, strategic people.
Right. Right. I think that's important. I think that it's important that when you're going through an isolation period, you do need to find those people who can help you, that can be there with you, and can also to some degree help push you out of your comfort zone too.
Yep.
It's comfortable to be isolated sometimes.
Yep. Especially when you're watching Star Trek.
Right, right.
Got you a glass of wine or
You know,
your favorite beverage, and you're cuddled up with a cat.
I have sat in there recently. We have discovered that there's a room in the house where I can sit and smoke, and it doesn't affect the rest of the house.
Oh,
So
nice.
I sit in there and I smoke my cigar and I watch my Star Trek, and I can get lost for hours. sitting there doing that.
Yes. That's what I'm talking
There you
about.
go.
You know, it's difficult. And so you have to have people that are willing to go, hey, you haven't been out of the house in a couple of days. You need to get up and go out and touch the grass and,
Smell the fresh
you
air.
know, get some fresh air, some sunlight. You look like Casper the Friendly Ghost. You need to get a little sunlight, you know, and help push you out of that comfort zone and out of that isolation. I think there are far more people in the world that are self-isolated than those who are isolated because they have no one. I, because in most cases, I find that people who talk about being isolated, they have plenty of people around them willing to help. They're just choosing not to reach out to them. You know, and so you have to be willing to have those, like Reverend Mark said, 1, 2, or 3 people. Doesn't have to be a lot of people,
No.
but just a handful of people who can help push you out of that comfort area into a place where you can do something that's good for you mentally and physically and emotionally.
Yep.
Bishop Ben, your thoughts?
Well, you all pretty much have it nailed it down. But for me, I'm one of those clergymen that have a trouble of asking people for help when I'm depressed or I'm sad, because I feel like, why should I add extra burden to somebody else's plate?
Right.
I'm supposed to be the bishop. I'm supposed to be the rock of the church. And I feel that if people see me vulnerable, then that makes me less of a clergyman. That makes me feel like, how can I, if I'm so broken, how can I help anybody else? So I tend to keep
Right.
it all in until it boils over. That's my problem.
And I think for most clergy, they feel that way to a certain degree at some point in their ministry. But the reality is that I have found, I used to have some clergy who would say, you share way too much about what's going on in your personal life. Because I share my mental health struggles. I share my emotional and physical health issues with people. And I go, the problem that most clergy have today is we don't share enough. Our people are able to put us on these huge pedestals because we look like these godlike figures that never have depression, and we never get sick, and we never, we don't struggle with anything. We have it all figured out. And I've actually had people come up to me and say, well, it's hard for you to understand because you have it all figured out. I don't have it all figured out.
Yeah.
I probably have less figured out than you do.
Right.
So
Right?
I think to some degree we have to share with people those struggles, at least to a certain degree, so that they see we're human too. We're no better than they are, and we're just struggling along the way everyone else is.
Yeah.
And through that, it inspires them then to continue struggling forward
That's right.
and moving forward.
Yeah. And yes, as ministers, we have to lead people, and they do have to have respect for you to lead them. And I think there's a balance of being transparent.
Mm-hmm.
I'm transparent on some things. Of course, I don't weigh into the depths that I would in front of my congregation as the same that I would in front of my therapist or,
Right.
people that I have confidence in.
Right.
But I'll tell people about things that I have overcome,
Right.
that I have gained victory over,
Right.
depression and learning how to recognize those thoughts that come through that lead me to dark places and sharing those.
Right.
Because people need to know that, people need to hear the testimonies of those that can overcome and those that are struggling but still able to move forward. So I think there's a balance in that. At the same time, if we you know, I remember being in a position to where I was surrounded by friends, surrounded by family. All of them came to my church when I was in my early days of ministry. And, you know, my bishop is 2.5 hours away and overseeing many, many churches and traveling himself at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then, you know, I only had one person that I could get to and talk through some of these situations and scenarios of what to do, a fellow minister. But he also was traveling and doing his own thing. So I couldn't talk to people in my congregation about certain things, and I was probably the loneliest during that time. And it was very hard, but when you find yourself in those positions, maybe seek out someone in a professional manner. Yes, you may have to, you know, health insurance or pay them.
Right.
But one, it gets you into position. You don't have to go, you can go to them perpetually, or you can just go to them till you get through certain situations. But I would highly encourage people to maybe seek out somebody that it may work for you to talk to somebody that's totally not in your faith or whatever. Or if it's important to you to talk to somebody that has similar faith to you, that's a licensed therapist, but at least you're moving into the place to where you're learning how to express yourself.
Right.
And then, you know, when you come, like myself, when you come to a place to where you find those that you can confide in, stop worrying about letting them know how you are when they say, "So how are you doing?"
Right.
You know, that's something that I have learned how to overcome and to be vulnerable to certain people. If I feel horrible and I know that I have the safety, the safe harbor, I have a safe space with those people, I'll tell them I'm not doing good.
Right.
Or you know, I'm not doing well at all. And that's okay to admit those things.
Yes,
It's okay to say, I'm not doing well, as just as much as it's okay to say, hey, I'm doing really good. We've got to learn to stop masking to make other people feel better about their view of us.
Right.
It's a very dangerous place to be. People in leadership and clergy and folks like that tend to do that. You know, yes, you can't be super transparent with every person that walks by. We're not saying to do that.
Right.
You know, one, if you don't have people that can hold a confidence, which I understand that. I've had many people betray confidences that I've, you know, confided in, or seek out somebody professionally.
Right.
And get into the practice of opening up to someone. That'll help break some of that isolation. They can give you some professional ideas and thoughts and well-educated points to help you in certain directions. But you have to overcome the fear when you do have those people in your life that you can open up to. You've got to overcome the fear of opening up.
Right.
Now, if they betray a confidence or whatever, then you deal with that. And you learn that not everybody can, you know, not every ship can hold water.
Right.
There's some people that can't hold that confidence. And if they don't, then you withdraw to the level in which they can handle it. And so, but it's very important. If you are prone to withdrawal and isolation, it's very important to find some outlet to relieve that pressure.
That's right.
Because you can only have pressure build up so much before it explodes.
That's right. And typically, when it explodes in a very dark manner. As we are talking to about depression, and you know, when you get into those situations where it builds up, that's usually when the self-harm begins. whether it be
Correct.
through drugs and alcohol or, you know, other forms of self hurt and self harm. And it ends up taking its toll on us physically and mentally and emotionally.
Very much.
And so I too have a therapist that I go to on a regular basis because Lord knows when battling major depressive disorder, depression is an everyday thing. It's there with me every single day. Some days it's a bit distant. It's still there staring at me. And then some days it's right there with me. You know, right beside me, whispering in my ear, you know. And that's difficult, but it's something that you learn to overcome. You learn to live with. And I remember somebody years ago told me they named their depression and they named their anxiety so that they could have conversations with it and basically be like, okay, I've had enough for today, Karen. I'm done. I'm not going to let you keep doing this to me today, you know? And I found that kind of comforting to a certain degree. I've named my depression and anxiety. And there are days that I have to have a come to Jesus with them, you know, and be like, okay, you got to knock it off. Enough's enough. And in some ways, that's therapeutic and helps me to overcome those moments. But there have been moments in the past 4 years, where, you know, I've come to the point of self-harm, and I didn't reach out until it was too late, and had to spend a little time in the hospital. My wife has had the same issue and had to spend time in the hospital. And it has taught me to never let it get to that point again. It is so important when you deal, especially with depression, that you have people to turn to. A therapist is a great tool, but they can't be there 24/7 either. There's times when you can't reach a therapist, and so you need somebody who can help talk you off the ledge, as it were, and help give you some perspective. I follow a person on Facebook, I'm not going to say who routinely posts about their struggle with depression. And that's their support network, is the people on Facebook. That can be good, that can be bad.
Right.
But at least they're reaching out to someone,
Yeah.
you know, rather than harming themselves. And so I commend them for that. That's a huge step. That's the first step that we have to take when we feel isolation and depression, is being willing to reach out to someone and say, I am really struggling. Today has been a really bad day. And I'll give you a little hint and a little secret that a lot of depressed people do that a lot of us just kind of shrug off as just normal conversation. There are times I'll have people ask me, how are you doing? And my answer is, I'm tired. It's not that I'm physically tired. I'm emotionally tired. I'm tired of fighting the depression. I'm tired of fighting the anxiety. I'm at a low moment when I say that. And a lot of depressed people use that. They'll say they're tired instead of just coming out and saying, today sucks, you know? And so when someone comes to me and says, I'm tired, I always try to dig a little bit deeper and say, well, what are you tired of? What's got you tired? You know? Because I know that's my coping and covering mechanism.
Yeah.
And so I want to make sure they're not in the same boat.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and learning that our focus determines our reality. what we're zeroed in on, it could be anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we find people zeroed in on certain things, and to us, you're like, wow, that has you off,
Mm-hmm.
but you don't know what level in which it is important to them,
Right.
or what level that it's deep for them. You know, you could be dealing with something that you're like, well, this was not that big of a deal, um, but to them, it's kind of how their life may be built around it.
Right.
You know, I learned a long time ago that there are certain things that I deem not of value that other people do. I remember when I was a teenager, and if you like this sport, I'll go ahead and apologize to you in advance. I'm not meaning to tell this story to offend anybody or to step on anybody's toes, but my cousin's husband and her son, and they were huge uh, uh, wrestling fans. You know, the Hulk Hogan's,
Right. Right.
what do you call the WWE?
WWE stuff.
Yeah, that, you know, all that stuff. And I remember seeing, I was probably 16, 17 years old, and you know, I find it very choreographed. I find it very funny and you know, and entertaining. Why? So I said something in the middle of a family get together, and I was joking about how, you know, staged it is and whatever it is. Man, you want to talk about triggering people.
Oh Lord, yes.
And my aunt looked at me and she was like, she's like, oh, we in the sweetest way. She's like, oh, we don't discuss those. We don't talk about that. It's, and she let me know in a nice way that, you know, this is a real thing for certain people. And it was an
Right.
eye opener to someone young like me, that something that I view as not very important is the world to somebody. You know,
Right.
somebody starts talking evil about Star Trek, Harry Potter, Titanic, or stuff that I'm interested in, you know, Star Wars, and they start dissing on it. It's kind of like, no, 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 you're not a fan. It's kind of like family stuff. Only family can talk about family. You know,
Right.
I can talk about my sister, but if you start talking about my sister, we're going to have some strong words.
Right. Right.
And so we have to realize that there's certain things in life that are very important to folks and that can trigger them. So when we hear those things that are sending people into these moments of depression, we need to listen, because there's something deep going on there, especially if it seems to be not much of a thing on the surface. It's something deep. And, you know, one of the greatest things to learn, you know, Jesus taught us this when they brought the woman to him accused of adultery.
Right.
The first thing he did was not start combating them or coming back at the accusers with words.
Mm-hmm.
He was silent. He wrote in the sand. We need to learn to listen to people. We need to learn to not judge a situation, but know what's going on
Right.
before we start jumping to conclusions.
Tara had a good question a few minutes ago. I apologize. The chat is kind of messed up tonight, and I'm not getting all the chat messages. But Tara had a question a few minutes ago about how do we handle when someone comes to us who needs more help than we can give them?
Mhm.
And that's a very good question.
Very good question.
That's one of the reasons I went back to get my clinical psychology degree, is so that I could provide them more help and service. Because in our local area, as I'm sure Mark will attest, there are not enough therapists in our area.
Right.
I mean, you go to set up an appointment with a therapist, it could be 4 or 5 weeks out. That's not helpful to someone in crisis right now, you know. My go-to is if they need more help than I can provide. I know of 2 or 3 therapists, in the area that I can refer them to that will get them in rather quickly if they're in crisis, especially if I'm referring them to them. They'll make time for them. And so I at least, that's my go-to, is to send them to someone who's able to help them better than I can. And until, of course, I get my license, and then, I might be able to help them myself. The problem lies, though, if it's a church member, we really have to refer them out to someone else, even if we're licensed, because it becomes a conflict of interest to be, have a parishioner who's also in therapy with you,
Right.
as pastor. And so
Yeah,
to avoid that ethical issue, we have to refer those out. But if it's somebody coming to me who's not a member of my church, who's coming to me for help, then I'll be able to help them much better.
Yeah. Well, one thing I do and I practice is when people come to me early on in the conversation, I start kind of learning if they have somebody they're seeing.
Right.
And I'll tell them, I say, well, I'm going to stay in my lane.
Right.
I can still encourage and counsel in the spiritual sense.
Right.
But I also recognize that if they're actively in therapy, that I want to respect what the therapist will say. And a lot of times the people will tell me, my therapist recommended this, recommended that. On the spiritual side, I can piggyback off that to help reinforce. Or if I come to a situation to where I can help, but I know that they need deeper, something deeper than what I can hand, I have an access to resources.
Yes.
That I'll recommend. Say, hey, I'm here to help you. I'm going to stay in my lane as a pastor, but here are some resources to help you. There's some numbers, there's some people, this is what they're like. If this doesn't work for you, here's a number to, a national conglomerate of people. And so, doesn't mean that we can't help. We have to help in our field, in our lane. And I think it's very important for ministers to remember that. And the horror stories we've heard of people trying to be therapist and pastor. It's very difficult. I mean, it's one thing to have a pastor who's a therapist. That's all they do on staff or something. It's another. It's very difficult if it's the senior pastor, and there's a lot there. So I agree with sending them out.
Right. As we begin to wind down, I also want to point out that if someone comes to you who's in severe crisis, there are some things that you can do immediately to help them. Anybody can do this, and that is, first off, you do kind of a mental health first aid triage, as it were. And if someone is super depressed and considering self-harm, the rule of thumb is, do they have a plan, and do they have the ability to enact said plan?
Right.
So if somebody comes to me and says, I'm thinking of using a firearm to off myself, but have no access to firearms, they may have a plan, but they don't have access to resources.
Right.
And so, that's a saving grace. But if they come to you and they have a plan and they seem to have thought it out and they have access to the resources, as much as I'm loath to suggest it because of all the things that have happened in the past, one of the first things that you can do is contact your local law enforcement agency.
Right.
And explain to them that this person you believe is a serious danger to themselves. And get them to the mental health help that they need.
Right.
I realize and recognize that it will likely end your friendship. And I have had friendships end over that. I had a person years ago in Arizona who contacted me, a friend of mine, and we had known each other for about 15 years. And he had a plan. He was ready to enact it. He had the resources to enact it. And so I was able to contact law enforcement in that area and say, this is where they are. This is what they've said. They have the resources. We need to try to get them help. And so they went and they found him and took him to the mental health facility for treatment. And when he got out of the mental health facility, he called me and blessed me out and ended our friendship. He didn't want to have friendship with me anymore. And unfortunately, sometimes that happens. But as I told him, and I stand by this, I would rather him hate me the rest of his life and be alive than for me to have tried to preserve the friendship and him be dead. You know? So sometimes you have to make that difficult decision to help someone even if they don't want help.
Right.
And but there are consequences to that, unfortunately. You may end up having a stronger friend afterwards, or you may end up losing the friend.
Yeah.
But either way it goes, you at least did the right thing and got them the help that they need.
That's right.
So don't ever sit on your hands if somebody comes to you and it looks like they have a plan and the resources to carry it out. Bishop Ben, you've been awful quiet. Your thoughts?
Well, I think you all have pretty much covered it. What more can I really add except, getting help is key. I think as clergy, all of us in the panel can agree that we have seen some traumatic things and seen people do some traumatic stuff. And it is key and paramount that you reach out to somebody and really get that help. Don't wait till it gets to the point where you're gonna gather resources to harm yourself.
Right.
Or make that end, reach out before it gets to that point.
Agreed. Reverend Mark, your final thoughts?
Well, I guess the last thing that I would leave you with is when you recognize that you're in those moments where you've isolated yourself or you are in the midst of depression, know that, one, there's people there and there's people in the world that would love to help you.
Right.
Two, know that so many go through what you're going through. We may not be going through the exact same thing you're going through. I think we've learned that it doesn't matter if you are in a small town or if you live in the highest skyscraper in a big city or have lots of wealth or well-known. Depression, mental health challenges can affect anybody.
Right.
And they can knock on anybody's door,
Right.
if you will, and attempt to be something that you've got to deal with, and it can come out of nowhere. So don't beat yourself up going, oh, I'm just a terrible person because I let myself get them this place. Life happens, and sometimes life happens so fast that we don't realize, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of a mess. It happens. And there are people that have dedicated their lives, clergy, friends, licensed therapists, psychiatrists that have dedicated their lives to help folks overcome those moments. And you may come to the place where you get help for a little bit, you learn the tools, and you never have to see a therapist again because you learn certain things. More power to you. Awesome. Or you may come to the place to where you need to regularly get some help, regularly talk to somebody, or it may be an ongoing thing. Either way, you won't know until you make that step. And it's a scary step, but it's a step that you can survive. It's a choice that will affect the rest of your life for the good if you make the decision that I'm not going to stay like this. I'm going to gain strength. I'm going to gain knowledge from it and understanding. And I'll say this, when we go into the gym and we work out, maybe not me, but other people work out to build our muscles, what happens? You have to have resistance to those muscles, and those muscles have to tear in order to grow. And so when things are tearing in our lives, or we find ourselves having pushback, know that we can use it to strengthen ourselves and to be better tomorrow than we are today. It all comes down to, I choose that I'm going to be better tomorrow than I am today by faith.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Expanding Your Faith. For more information on Expanding Your Faith, check us out on facebook.com/Expanding Your Faith. We are available on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, and wherever you find your podcasts. Until next week, when we once again attempt to expand your faith, keep shining bright